Hi class. In this video, we're going to be talking about circles, the terminologies for parts of a circle, and the formulas for that. So let's start with the center. The center is defined as the middle point of a circle. So here I'm just going to eyeball where the middle point of the circle would be. So I'm just going to say it's right here. So that's the center of a circle. The radius, which we're going to underline in red here, the radius is defined as the length from the center of the circle to the edge of the circle. So this dot is my center of the circle. So the length would just be from the center all the way to one of my edges. So any pretty much point on this black edge, I guess, would be the edge. So then I would just let radius equal to r. So r is the symbol for radius. So again, radius is just the length from the center of the circle to one of the edges. Now for diameter, which we're going to underline in purple, diameter is the length from one edge of a circle to the other edge, but it has to pass through the center of the circle. So for example, if I go from the center of the circle all the way to the edge here, that would be my radius, right? But if I draw another line that also goes from my center of the circle to the edge, that's also my radius. But look at these two purple lines that I just drew. They go from the edge of the circle to the other edge of the circle, and they pass through the center. So in theory, diameter is just radius times 2. And we let d be the symbol for diameter. And now the next definition we're going to talk about would be the circumference. So I'm going to underline that in green. So circumference is the distance all the way around the circle once. You can also think of it as perimeter. So the perimeter of a square, a rectangle, or a triangle is just the total distance around those shapes. Well, circumference is just a fancy word for the total distance around the circle, but you can also call it perimeter. But just because it's a circle, it has a fancy name called circumference. So I would just go all the way around the circle, and that would be known as my circumference there. And of course, this green line should be where the black is. I just showed it on the outside for a better visual. Now, for area, which I'm going to underline with brown, is defined as the shaded region of a circle. So pretty much the area of a circle is just the entire circle shaded. That is the area of a circle. Just the entire region is shaded. Okay, now we can talk about some formulas. So for formulas, we're going to start with a very simple one. The first formula I want to talk about is how to find diameter if I'm given radius. So if I want to find diameter, which I'm going to let it be represented with d, and I have radius, all I have to do is take my radius and multiply it by 2. So diameter equals to 2 times the radius. That does fall in line with what we talked about here, where diameter is just radius twice. So if I take 2 and I multiply it by radius, I get diameter. So if my radius was 5 and I times 5 by 2, my diameter should be 10. Now, we also have to talk about the case where if we're instead given diameter, how do we find the radius? So in this case here, if I'm given diameter, let's say my diameter was 10, and I want to find radius. Well, I would just take the diameter and divide it by 2, and then I would get my radius back. So radius, if I'm given diameter and I want to find radius, I can just take my diameter and divide it by 2. But if I'm given radius and I want to find diameter, I just take the radius and times it by 2. So vice versa there. Now for circumference, I'm going to let C equal to circumference here. So C equals to circumference. And the formula to find circumference, which is the distance all the way around the circle once, would just be pi multiplied by diameter. And in this case, I'm going to let pi for simplicity. So this is the Greek symbol for pi. For simplicity, I'm just going to let pi be equal to 3.14. But of course, pi would be 3.14159, etc., and it just keeps going on forever. But for simplicity, as you can see, with our calculations that we're going to do in another video, we're just going to use pi as 3.14. But yeah, the formula to find the circumference, which is the distance all the way around the circle, is just pi times diameter. And now the formula to find the area of a circle, we're going to let A represent the area of a circle. The formula would just be pi times radius squared. Okay, and another way of thinking about this is instead of writing pi times radius squared, you can write pi times radius times radius. So the area would be pi times radius times radius. And the reason I write this down instead is because my students usually get confused when they see radius squared because they think radius squared means you take the radius and you times it by 2. But what it actually means is you take the radius and you times it by itself. So for example, if my radius was 3 centimeters, if you take radius and you times it by 2, you get 6 centimeters. But if you take radius and you times it by itself, it would be 3 times 3. So the answer would be 9 and not 6. So hopefully this gives you an idea of some circle terminologies and some basic formulas.